Hi, I'm Shaun Leane. I'm the President of the Legislative Council in the Victorian Parliament, and I'm here to give an update on this week's sitting. This week there was actually 4 bills passed in this chamber during the week. One of them was the Australian Grand Prix Amendment Bill, which extends the maximum duration of the race period and allows the Grand Prix Corporation to host events approved by the Minister, which are not necessarily motorsport events or Formula One events, and also makes just some minor changes to that piece of legislation. Statute Law Revision Bill, which is a bill that, it's an important bill. It doesn't sound that important, but it has a look at a lot of pieces of legislation to make sure they're up to modern standards as far as they're easy to read, so people that need to interpret those bills completely understand them. Another piece of legislation that was debated in this chamber was the Domestic Animals Amendment, Rehoming Cats and Dogs and Other Matters Bill. And it establishes a pet rehoming authorisation scheme to assist those organising rehoming cats and dogs, further petitions for councils to be informed about animals in foster care in those districts, facilities for collection of information about the outcome efforts to rehome dogs and cats, repeals the foster care registration scheme, and it does a number of other very important reforms in this area. And the last bill we passed in this chamber was the Casino Gambling Legislation Amendment Bill, which proposed the impended deadline to the 1st of December 2007 for certain requirements relating to cashless gaming, payment of winnings and mandatory card play. All of those pieces of legislation other than the Statute Law Reform Bill went through committee stages in this chamber, and the Domestic Animals Amendment, the Rehoming Cats and Dogs, there was some amendments passed during that committee stage to this particular piece of legislation. Other items that were discussed other than legislation, there's a lot of debate in these chambers that are not necessarily just around passing pieces of legislation. Other items around public housing, corruption in the construction sector, animal shelters, flags, and retail crime, and renaming Berwick Springs Lake were debated in this chamber, as well as other items as well, as I said. Love talking about events that happen within this building on a sitting week. And one fantastic event which was in our Queen's Hall, which is our major event space, was the National Carers Week, and they hosted a celebration, as I said, in our Queen's Hall. And as far as there's a lot of people in caring roles, and you know, as you know, there's a lot of people and members of your family that may be in caring roles, and this was for MPs to understand what sort of organisations are out there to assist their constituents in caring for members of their families and others that they care for. So that was a fantastic event. There was also a number of treaty events through the building, including a smoking ceremony on the steps of Parliament House, morning teas, and a lot of the members of the First People's Assembly in having events and around the building all of the sitting week. The legislation of the treaty bill was passed in the Legislative Assembly. Speaking of the treaty bill, that's a bill that will be debated in this chamber in the coming sitting week, as well as other pieces of legislation that came from the Assembly, which was Public Parks Land Legislation Amendment, Building Legislation Amendment, Mental Health Legislation Amendment Bill. I will give you an update of how those pieces of legislation travelled through this chamber after the next sitting week, and I'm looking forward to see you then.